Good evening.
Oh, yes.
I'd like to convene our Thursday, December 13th review of the town plan. I think when we last left the theater, we had just reviewed Chapter 8. And we will be moving on to Chapter 9. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah.
Did we finish it?
we did arts and culture.
Yes, we did.
You did.
And we didn't want to move on into Chapter 9.
Okay. Sure.
So, historic and scenic resources. In fact, one of the big discussions in Chapter 8 was we were talking about that administrative structure. I think we spent some time talking about that. So we're off on to Chapter 9.
Actually, just before you start, I apologize. I mistakenly thought we hadn't done the arts and culture resources. And that's the way you guys are here, right?
We're just glad to be here.
I apologize. I had these three. I'm sorry about that.
It's fine.
If they have comments,
Yeah.
they can make
You
them.
could, yeah,
Sorry.
you would like to make a comment on,
We're in support of the chapter.
that's the best news I've heard.
Yeah. Short and sweet.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
Would you like to make a similar statement for the next three?
So, historic and scenic resources. Brattleboro includes its New England mill town and agricultural heritage, and has a strict.
I would like to open a public hearing first. I want to make sure I didn't say that.
So, Brattleboro historic and scenic resources include a New England mill town, an agricultural heritage and natural beauty, and an intact historic downtown and West Brattleboro Village. Our settlement pattern is a record of our sometimes uneasy coexistence with streams and rivers, yet still holds many stunning vistas. Brattleboro has an active historical society and many private and institutional property owners dedicated to preserving our abundant natural and historic resources. This plan recognizes their efforts and supports their endeavors to ensure these assets are handed down to the next generation. Any comments?
This looks great.
Laura?
Just a couple. One is the first policy in action, I-1, support organizations and property owners that enhance citizen awareness of Brattleboro's history and numerous artifacts. And then 911 is assist applicants with permitting processes. That to me seems more like it should be in 9.2 and 991, and that maybe some language about the historical society and preserving the help supporting the library in its preservation and maintenance of the collections, and that because the language in the policy is supporting organizations, and that's I'd be happy because I understand from talking to at least a few members of the Planning Commission. When I've been making my comments, I've been making my comments thinking that it's going to go back to the Planning Commission and you guys are going to work on it. But it's talking to at least some people, the idea of sort of reopening that whole process is not, it seems cumbersome. So I'd be happy to come up with some language and run it by some Planning Commission members and bring it to, when we have the meeting and we're talking about language, or, unless you guys want to suggest something, but
You're suggesting moving action.
I'm suggesting moving action 9.1 to 9.2, which is about the, you
I
know,
don't think there's a problem with
That
that.
doesn't require any words.
Yeah, it's just,
but I'm also talking about adding another line in 9.1 then about actually supporting the organizations that are due, you know, so, and I'd be happy to come up with language for that. You know, I didn't think you guys, it just seemed when reading it, it didn't seem like it meshed with that policy.
okay, so are you specifically citing the library as a resource that contains?
Yeah, because they're, you know, they've got the, and sort of supporting the preservation and maintenance of their collections, the Historical Society, and any of the organizations that are doing
Okay.
that kind of work.
I think that's easy enough to do. I don't think it.
Okay.
Well, one of the things we need to be clear on is that we're having these general conversations. And we need to know that if this is a substantive change, then we need to do substantive changes with motions. If they're more grammatical or moving something, then if the board is in agreement, and what we've been doing is talking in generalities.
Right. I would suggest something like
Because
this.
we're gonna get to the end of this, and
Yes.
then we're gonna go, okay, what did we do?
Right.
Because my answer to that today was that you're writing everything down what we said.
What I'd say is that suggestion from Dora constitutes an edit. It's assigning an action, you know, a sentence from one place to another and inserting one that better represents the policy, which is support organizations and property owners. So, I mean, it's up to the board.
Are you saying move 9.12 to 9.2?
I'm saying 9.11 to 9.2.
Yes.
And I'm happy to make a motion when it, you know, I don't think that's what we're doing in this meeting, but I'm happy when we come time to do that. I'm happy to make a motion if people feel more comfortable with that.
I don't think anything that
I
Dora
don't think
suggests.
that's a substantive change in my
No,
opinion.
it's an edit, and even the suggestion of the more specific action step, I think, can be incorporated on the basis of their comments. It doesn't require special revision on, you know, a special process to improve that revision.
And I just want to address one thing. The question of whether this goes back is based on whether changes are major or minor. And I think you could have a change that is substantive but still minor. I just get nervous someone will look back on this.
The only way that it's going to go back is if the board sends it back.
Right.
It's not going to be your decision to
Yes, exactly.
send it back. It's our decision whether it gets sent back.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm wrong about that, but I think if you make a, quote, major change, then you need to notice more meetings, is that right?
No, I don't think so.
No, they can make
It's public hearing.
they can make a major change here.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood the language.
What I was commenting on was the sort of, the comments I was making were more sort of like asking you guys just to work on the language. And I'm getting a better understanding from having talked to some planning commission members about the whole issue of reopening it at that level. And that you guys would actually rather us wordsmith here. So I'm happy, you know, I'm just saying that my former comments were geared toward that.
I think what it's fair to say is a minor edit or even a suggestion of inserting something that's not in conflict or, you know, requires you're not setting off in a different direction, you're clarifying something, right? So you don't want to eliminate any language because you disagree with it, and you don't want to add any other language in because it's the opposite of what you're removing, the opposite of what's there. So these are minor changes that as long as the select board approves the, you know, at the end of this process, if the select board hands us back something that says, you've got a record of the changes that we're suggesting, go away and do it, and nothing constitutes major, then the plan, because this is a draft, the planning commission can make those revisions, represent you with another version of the draft which you could then adopt, right?
That's the plan.
Yeah.
David?
But I just want to make sure procedurally before I talk to a couple of substantive comments I have about this chapter. We're going to finish going through our discussion through the end of the land use section and other sections. And then I anticipate we'll get some sort of a list back that catalogs through changes that we have suggested, and then the board's going to have to walk through individual areas, I think, with a series of motions for language changes that we're going to recommend. And then we'll get another draft back from the planning commission? Is that what's anticipated?
Well, I think if there are substantive changes, yes. If they're not, I think this is where Bob is going to play a part in there, and this is that if they're not substantive, then we won't need the motions to change, but the ones that are, yes, you are correct.
Right.
But I think my concern had to do with the board being in agreement with changes. We've discussed a lot of things, but there hasn't been full endorsement from the board as to everything yet. We're going to have to go back through many of the ones we've talked about.
That's an issue. So in a circumstance like this where Dora's made a comment and there's no, we all recognize it and think that it fits within there's no reason why that minor edit couldn't be made. But if there's somebody else on the select board that actually does disagree with what Dora just said, then we need to know about that right now, and you need to, resolve that amongst yourselves. But if we're going to move forward, assuming that Dora's constructive comment can be incorporated, and that none of the rest of you disagree with that, there's, the two planning commission members here are authorized out of the planning commission to sort of know when a threshold issue is under discussion or not. They're not objecting to this change. We would treat that as a minor change to be incorporated in the document at a later point. But something more substantive and more serious, maybe in the land use chapter or something, you can think of instances where you want to remove language or replace some language with other language that you're going to need to agree on, then a motion actually making that directive clearly to the planning commission would be beneficial. But something like this, we could just take it on board as like, that's reasonable, let's just incorporate that as a small change.
My concern is that we see a list of the things that it's understood are being incorporated by the planning commission, so that we can then, as select board members, go back through as anything that's been passed over and raise it as a motion, because I know there have been some of those that have been passed over thus far.
I think the previous two sessions that we've had present us with some challenges in terms of establishing exactly whether that was a comment provided by an individual select board member or whether that was the consensus of the select board.
You'll be able to ascribe those and give them back to us so we can raise them again
yes.
in some form or other.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
So then my individual comments on this historic use chapter on page 86. At the end of the first paragraph, there's a discussion of adoption of new regulations that would impose restrictions on changes to existing structures. And I want to make sure that there's some acknowledgement of the balance between the town's interest in preservation and individual landowners' ability to make use of their property and to make changes to their property. In that same vein, and as I've indicated throughout these public hearings, I want to see that the suggestion or that the references to new proposed ordinances, and that being in that next blocked section beginning with enacting on page 86, refer to consideration rather than endorsement of adoption of local historic district regulations, and that I make that same comment with respect to the last two bullets that essentially contemplate adoption of a design ordinance, and that, as I understand it, we have components of design ordinance at this time, but not a full design ordinance in place. And I want those to be for consideration, not for endorsement at this time.
I think if I can follow up on that, which I think I may say the same thing as David just town plan recommends establishing a local historic district downtown. Now, when I look at that, when your building is considered in a historic district, it follows a different set of guidelines if it wants to remodel. Now, not everyone wants to have, not every building A would qualify. I don't think. I think that when we start imposing the building is in a historic tax district, and the building owner may not want his building classified that way, aren't we overstepping our bounds here?
Well, any district that was created would have to pass muster with the select board.
Well, that's a, you know, the reality there is that we're an affable bunch here, but it's still a political, it takes three people to say, we want this historic tax district. And so I'm trying to circumvent that here by saying, okay, if individual property owners want to do that, that's great. That's their prerogative. But there are issues that come, there are benefits that come with it, but there are issues that come along with it too.
This idea started from the planning commission having a discussion about the houses along the common, and the staff wanted to make that area part of the downtown. But we were concerned for a variety of reasons, for traffic going around the common and so on, that those structures, which are mostly businesses now, multi-use businesses, there'd be increased traffic and they might be chucked up in some way. And the board felt that those structures were of a historic quality that should be maintained, and not necessarily their uses curtailed in any way, but the facades maintained. So, for example, one of our members is an architect, and the concern there was that they could be, upgraded and made useful, and there wouldn't be any restraint on the productivity of the structure, only maintaining the historic character of the facade. So they can be reworked whatever way you want, keeping that facade straight.
Well, they have to find, I think my understanding of when you were working on historical buildings, there's a different set of guidelines than someone building a house next door, am I not correct?
Well, if it's a local ordinance, you have a lot more flexibility. When it's a national tax credit, then you have to go.
That doesn't delineate what's in here.
No, we say it's a local ordinance.
I think that basically our thought behind it is that before you demolish your building in a historical business district, or substantially change the fascia or the outside of it, you might have to go before the DRB or some other form of review. I don't think we envision really advanced stuff like the federals require. But whatever it is has to go through here.
I think those are interesting ideas and they're worthy of consideration, but like I've said a lot of times, I don't think we're ready to adopt them today. I think they need full hearing through the process, and I don't want the town plan to say we're in favor of it. I want the town plan to say we're willing to consider it. But I said that right through this.
But I think the key point, this is not meant to be a plan, the key point to consider here is that the distinction that we're drawing here is between an individual building that has been reviewed by an expert in historic preservation, and that the building is intact enough to actually be listed on a national register. Under those circumstances, the property owner is the beneficiary of substantial tax breaks and other supports that allow them, will provide them with some assistance, some affirmative assistance to maintain the structure in its historic integrity. And that does restrict what they can do because the federal government is willing to provide that benefit. We're not saying, we don't think that, with all due respect to the property owners in downtown, we don't think there are too many structures that are not on that list that could qualify for that list right now. The purpose of this ordinance is to make clear that if the community expresses a view that can be supported independently, that there's a neighborhood that has historic significance and historic meaning because of the predominant form of the buildings and the way they form a streetscape and many other factors, then we should be able to name that district, establish that it has got some historic integrity, and provide design requirements that mean that a current owner must observe some basic and fairly simple procedures before they make an addition, demolish the building, or repurpose its use dramatically. The history of the zoning district that is on the common there on Park Place is that those old homes, those grand old homes, are allowed as office use, but not as other retail uses. And the argument there was that, and this is all that time, this is what I gleaned from talking to people who were around at the time, that they were concerned that what has happened to the old Victorian home over the road here that's being turned into the subway could happen to those buildings if retail was no permitted. So in the instance of the old Victorian home over the road, there's a predominantly plastic facade that's been bolted onto the front of that home, and that's the subway store. There's apartments above and behind and so forth, right? So from the street, you're confronted by a contemporary retail facade with internally lit plastic signs and large glass windows. And there's no mechanism that the town would employ to prevent that from happening. So when it came to these well-regarded and well-maintained old homes on Park Place, they limited the uses to offices in the belief that that would restrict the risk of somebody wanting to alter the facade. And what we're saying is, if you want to call out the historic integrity of that streetscape, then do that and say to the owners, we're explicitly telling you that we don't want you to add on a facade or put on a modern extension on the back or have an aluminum garage in the driveway or a variety of other things. So set up some basic guidelines and then actually broaden the use and say, you can do retail in there. You can have an art gallery or a jewelry store or a restaurant, which would bring more of a 24/7 or at least a sort of an 18-hour, 7-day-a-week use to that part of the downtown, and then extend programming use and the vitality of the commons as an overlooked but an important green space in the community. So actually try and encourage alternative uses for those buildings. But what we wanted to do was ensure that the facade and the form of those buildings is preserved. So that's the rationale behind, first of all, changing the boundaries of the district, and then being very clear as to what you want to have happen with those buildings. We feel that the individual property owners would gain. They would gain in terms of being able to sell their buildings or redevelop those buildings in terms of their use into a broader range of uses, not just offices. It acknowledges that they've already got a large amount of blacktop for parking, off-street parking already provided, and it would make that neighborhood more active, more hours of the day, particularly on the weekend and particularly at night. And it was felt that that was the commons actually constitutes a resource for the community that could be enhanced in that way. It doesn't require them to do it, doesn't make them do it, it also simplifies the regulatory matrix by saying, we're actually talking about the facade of your building, right? And we're quite clear about that in the language of the ordinance, so that's what's proposed. Rather than just knocking off uses, hoping that by eliminating some uses that are understood to have some bad potential consequences, and that's the way it's been done so far in Brattleboro, rather than taking on the task of designing design standards that can be implemented and used and understood. So that's the major purpose. We really don't think there's that many buildings downtown that would qualify for the National Register. That's the most challenging to comply with and live with, and that's not what we're calling for. Does that help people?
I think it's a great articulation of the goal of why we want to pay the zoning consultant to come and rewrite the ordinance. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Be considered.
So if it's a great idea, you just don't want to just like say it's a great idea.
It's a great idea, you know?
Just say.
We can see this with an entire rewrite.
Okay.
Any other comments?
Just a small one. If you take a look at paragraph 9.1.3, I think there might be some missing words. If you take a look at the second line there, if you try to read the sentence, it doesn't.
Yeah, it's a bit clunky.
Yeah. Expanding tax credits and something easier. Making it easier
Yeah.
for properties? I don't know. So it just needs,
We can get it as an edit.
I just don't know what it's saying. So that
I
would
think
be
it should be making expanding tax credit opportunities easier for property owners.
Ah. If you just insert that word making, that would
Yeah.
get the kink out.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll have to consider that.
Dick, I looked up what I was trying to articulate before. Can I say what the correct thing is? If there's what's considered a major change, then the board has to have a new meeting and republish the changed plan at least 15 days prior to that meeting. And it's more relevant now because there's also a thing in the statute that says you have 120 days from when you start, so that'll be, I think, in February. I just wanted to call that to the board's attention. I'll be a little clumsy.
Municipal facilities and services. You're up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't.
Number 10.
You know, I was thinking about what I was going to say, and it's kind of challenging because this is an audience that knows more about municipal facilities and services, and it would kind of be a waste of time for me to tell you about them. I think it makes more sense to just jump right in. I mean, if you're interested in where it came from, it's from our shred process and other public input that we've gone over. You know, the chapter is somewhat exhaustively, so I thought it made sense to just.
Why don't you go through a little bit of that, just because we've got a television audience?
Oh, one of these is a member of the planning commission, so he was.
No. We got
television.
the camera's rolling.
I'm sorry. To determine what the priorities were for future municipal facility and service use, the Town Plan Advisory Group, which we often refer to as TPAG, held a number of public meetings, I think 20 or 30?
Yeah.
Quite a few. And sort of surveyed the public to figure out where the priorities of the public lay. And there were further meetings called charrettes, which seems just to be like smaller meetings to me, but they sound very important when you call them charrettes. And that helped us further narrow what the big ideas the public was thinking about for us to articulate in the plan.
We also interviewed the department heads and worked with the capital budget or plan that was in place at the time.
And spoke to the finance committee of the town meeting.
Municipal administration. I noticed you left the assistant town manager. The town manager is appointed by and reports to the select board.
It was not intended. I think it was began being drafted before the assistant town manager was hired.
We do not,
It's not the first.
the board does not, the town manager does hire the assistant town manager.
Right.
But I do believe that it should, the assistant town manager should be referenced.
Okay.
Referenced there, not in that same line, but under municipal administration.
Yep. Thank you.
Laura, you had your hand up before about
Yeah, just sort of a little wordsmithing with the policies and actions, 10-1. I'm assuming that you mean, when you say require land use practices, that you're talking about for town and public projects, so it should probably say that. So that we're clear. You know, you could go either with town or public, but that's, you know.
Yeah, sounds good.
David?
I have concern with the broad statement of policy in the box at the top of municipal facilities and services, and then with the ordering of the policies and actions, goals, and the omission, I think, of one primary one. I think that the most important municipal facilities and services that we provide are police and fire, and roads, public works, and that's in fact reflected in the discussion that follows. Public works is right up the top, and I really think that the broad statement at the very beginning of the section needs to refer to maintaining and supporting public health, safety, and welfare, and that the references to police and fire need to be first or second on the list, and that there needs to be a reference to public works. I know there's a separate section about transportation, but I think there need to be separate policies and actions, you know, separate bullet number about public works, and I think police, fire, and public works need to be right at the top of the list, because that is where we spend our money, and that is our core function here at the municipal level. Roads, police, fire, and then all the rest of these are supporting those and facilitating orderly development and health, safety, and welfare of the community in many different ways. So I'd like to see public works added and police and fire moved up. Under municipal center and issues and needs on page 89, I think this section obviously had to have been written before the police fire bond vote, and I think that we need some updates since we're going to be adopting this after that bond vote. So I'd like to see the municipal center section rewritten to address the police fire facility vote. Same with respect to the wastewater treatment plant discussion on page 90. We're almost at the end of that project now. Issues and needs on page 99 under public safety, police department. Same. Same on page 100 under issues and needs, fire department. Same on page 101, solid waste and recycling. We're actually almost out of the curbside compost pilot, and I think we're on the verge of endorsing town-wide voluntary curbside compost going forward and funding it. I'd like all those to be addressed. Same with the archery building discussion on page 102. I also wonder, and this may be a much broader question, as to which there may or may not be research and data, but under municipal finance at the bottom of page 89, I wrote a comment about whether there's any data or ability to discuss the impact on our financing and our tax burden of the town's role as a regional economic hub. I'm wondering if there is data or analysis that can be included here. It certainly is a situation that impacts our ability to provide services and the tax burden we face. And I think it's something that should be addressed expressly in the town plan if there's data to analyze it. And I don't know.
You mean basically the fact that our infrastructure has to serve the needs not just of Brattleboro citizens, but people coming from other towns?
That's correct. And the impact on the services we need to provide and the tax revenue we need to generate in order to support those services. That is a significant issue that we deal with. And it's a significant issue that impacts the burden on the property owners here in town. And I think that we should be addressing it as part of the town plan.
Well, I think I would agree with the first part of your statement, though I'm not sure what information there is out there in terms of how you gauge that impact.
I'm
That's
trying
part
to
of my question.
understand it. Like, you mean tourists and people who shop in downtown?
No, the topic that I'm talking about has been thoroughly vetted throughout the municipal and town discussions of the police and fire facilities. I can
Local
get
surrounding
data,
towns,
but
utilizing our programs, whether it be rec department, whether it be the library. I think that this board, and certainly David, has led the charge on the impact that this has had. The only thing that I know it has had an impact, but we seem to have a difficult time trying to glean information that says it impacts by X.
Right. That's because not since the Nixon administration has there been guidance from the federal government or any other entity on what is referred to as revenue sharing across jurisdictions. Outside of New England, where there's county government and you pay county taxes in addition to
But
municipal
I don't think
taxes.
there's anything in here that says regional hub or considered a regional hub.
There is discussion of the regional hub status in economic development and also in land use with the commercial districts.
But
I'm
it
talking
needs
about in
to be
terms
in
of
this one.
financial burden. I mean,
Well, I mean, what I want to say there on the question of revenue sharing and the way typically tax policy is implemented in New England, and there's significant variation across New England because there are home rule states and not home rule states. Turns out that Vermont's not. However, so the question of whether people who have their primary residence in Dummerston but inadvertently or intentionally use the roads and services and facilities that are paid for and maintained by the citizens of Brattleboro is I think we've talked about this over email communication with reference to the police fire complex. It's a fairly complex area of analysis. There's lots of different treatments of it, but there's the general view in land use economics is that any added burden to the maintenance of public infrastructure in a regional hub that comes from people from outside the region using those services should be adequately offset by the higher property values of the land and its improvements that are present in a regional hub, such that the ongoing capital commitments of that community can be met. In other words, there isn't a price chopper in Dummerston, it's in Brattleboro, and there's employment and tax value that's associated with that supermarket that Dummerston doesn't benefit from. Dummerston doesn't have the owner of the price chopper complex paying property taxes to Dummerston, and it doesn't have the impact of people from Brattleboro going there and wearing out the blacktop to and from it. So, it's a complicated analysis. You basically do an input-output analysis, and on balance, what you should find over time is that the increased property values of that piece of land with the price chopper on top of it pays property taxes adequate enough to Brattleboro to manage any kind of imposition that might have come from that improvement being there. And cumulatively over time, that's how it should play out.
I understand that theory, and that theory would have much more resonance with me and with residents here and with residents of other regional hubs around the state. If regional hubs didn't have tax rates, property tax rates that were twice those of bedroom communities, which is essentially what many of the surrounding towns have become. And I think that there needs to be some discussion of that in the town plan, because it is a substantial hurdle and burden that we're facing going forward that we need to try to address.
Right.
And the town plan is a place where we need to raise that issue.
Right, so the anomalies would include the predominance of things such as school buildings and other not-for-profit or public structures that may not pay the same tax rates if it was commercial, and a variety. There are factors that are complicated that need to be taken into account, but, you know, I would say, with all due respect, the question or the issue that you raise is an important and good one. Maybe it needs to be directed towards the state legislature in terms of how they structure the tax system in the state, because there are as you point out, every regional hub in Vermont suffers the same kind of challenges. I would say the White River Junction, Heartland is probably the only one outside of Chittenden County that's making more out of it than others, that are not behind as a consequence. I think Rutland and Bennington and many other communities confront the same issues. But I don't know, I mean, it's a question for you to resolve. If you want to direct the Planning Commission to further investigate and research that, and then that's great. But I think that discussion was left aside from the plan as a whole because it's controversial and it's uncertain, and it's not definitive.
Aside from the numbers issue and what statistics, the fact that we're a regional hub is a major factor in our municipal in our municipal government. So it should be mentioned somewhere in here because we're a regional hub, which means that we provide services not just to our residents, but to residents around. And that, that if it's big enough that it's in the economic chapter, then it should be in the municipal services chapter anyway.
Okay.
I don't know about the statistics that David's asking for, but
it's extremely difficult to generate, right? Because I spent some time looking for them. There's no, for obvious, an obvious place to look would be a university, a land-grant university like UVM, and of course, they've done nothing.
Well, my preference would be to have this addressed directly, and the extent to which supporting that is available obviously will impact the way in which it's written up. But that is something I feel needs to be added because it's something we should be dealing with at a municipal level and then at an advocacy level in order to try to respond to the needs of the town's residents and property owners. And I can make a motion when time comes if it's necessary. We'll see if everybody agrees that it should be the point or not.
Okay.
Well, I guess I would ask you to probably have a conversation with what kind of language that you would be looking for. Obviously, that's definitely going to have to be a motion as to.
Yeah.
If
I need to come in some part from the Planning Commission. I can write something up.
No, and when you had emailed me earlier on, it definitely spurred me to look, and I didn't find anything definitive or even vaguely useful.
Right, but you understand exactly the issue.
Yes.
In fact, you're able to speak to it occurring all across the state, with some areas being able to overcome the burden better than others. That being Chittenden and
right.
White River Heartland, and others not being able to do that. Springfield, Bennington, Rutland, Barry, Montpelier,
right.
St. Albans, St. Johnsbury.
Those communities that are experiencing strong growth in population and economic activity are weathering it better than others.
I have one quick change, and it's on the bottom of page 90. The town should continue to, and you have implement, and I want to change implement to explore sustainable practices in purchasing, and could benefit from the guidance from either an internal committee addressing the sustainable or outside consultant. That's at the bottom of page 90.
I thought we had a policy, but I mean, it's not, just a point of clarification. We have a policy on local purchase. Well, it's a stretch, but I think local purchase is regarded as more sustainable than not local.
No, when you're talking about the energy chapter, compared in the sentence right before it.
Yeah, okay. So I think that's what is intended there, but yeah, it's good. Yeah.
Christopher.
Yeah, also on page 90, the bullet item, the second bullet item for the top. I wonder if you could just update that, because we have data through June 30, 2012. I think that would be desirable just to put the latest available information in.
Yes,
Sorry?
No.
Well, just to go back to what we were talking about earlier, I was thinking maybe even just including a table that has tax rate comparisons between Brattleboro and other towns might suffice to illustrate that.
If you can, anyway. I'd like to get better direction from the board on that.
To illustrate.
To illustrate the issues that David's been talking about the issue of being a hub, about including a table that has tax comparisons between hubs and non-hubs might.
I think that if you were going to do something like that, it might be in maybe the economic development chapter versus,
Well,
I'm not sure that just because, if you compared the other municipalities in the surrounding town and you looked at their population, I mean, and their size and the amount of roads and people, that I don't think that that's a fair comparison.
Yeah, I mean,
They're not paying for what we're paying for. Even if they didn't come here, I mean, the fact that we're 12,000 people, I think that that's, just because Vernon's got a lower tax rate, I mean, they've also got a nuclear power plant in their backyard that pays a substantial amount. That's why their property taxes are skewed in a different way. If that nuclear power plant was there, their tax rate might be equal to ours.
right. And the other way of looking at this is if you, I'm using Halifax as an example here. You may pay a lower rate of tax in Halifax, but as a household, the burden that you, the burden, right, when you wake up, you're still in Halifax. The burden that you experience is that every time you want to do something, including shop for weekly groceries or go to school or visit a doctor, you have the personal burden of coming to Brattleboro to do it. So, if you're looking at household expenses, it's not as if living in one of these smaller communities without the services present frees those people from expense. They have their own expenses associated with accessing those services, and so. The question for that municipality is: are they raising enough taxes to maintain the services and the infrastructure that they have? And arguably they do. They've got dirt roads, they've got volunteer fire departments, and they don't have hospitals or schools. And so those tax rates reflect that. Those citizens, for whatever reason, to access those services, usually choose Brattleboro. So the point that I'd like to make here, though, is we think this discussion is important, and we think it's an important planning issue. On balance, I'm not entirely sure whether the appropriate location for this discussion, or even the research that would support it, is the town plan. And, you know, what I hear you saying is that this is a pressing issue that you want more information on. The planning department is more than happy to do that investigation. I'm not sure that it's the best place to locate that work is in the town plan. And so we're happy to produce a paper or a document or do other things that you would consider to be useful. But I'm not sure how much of it should really be contained in the town plan.
Sure.
So it's clear that my suggestion of putting a table in might not be supported by the rest of the board. It was just something that came to me.
I just don't think that's the data point.
It's and I mean, it was just something that like popped into my head as something, and so I don't think we need to belabor the discussion anymore. But just to go back to what I said earlier, it's the fact that we are a regional hub is a major factor in municipal services, and it, you know, and it just should be in there as an issue of the cost to the town. It's you know, whether you can find the data that David's talking about or have more illustrative discussion about it, but it is a major factor, and it's a fact. It doesn't, you know, we can argue about economic development and we can argue about populations in other towns that can do it better, and maybe that's true, but it still doesn't change the fact that regional hubs do find it more difficult to manage their finances because of that.
That last statement, I'm not sure I'd agree with. I mean, I just think that.
I think what I'm hearing is the board saying that they would like to see something. I mean, is there
For
agreement
inclusion
on
in
that?
that section.
Or
There's
not?
two of us, I think.
I think that trying to, I don't disagree with David, making sure that there is knowledge that we are a regional hub, and being a regional hub has financial implications, although it's hard, we do know that they do, but it's hard to come up with the amounts that they do impact us. But I also agree with what you said in terms of saying, we have a building that's, we have a parcel of property that's generating a lot of revenue through taxes because of its high assessment, that people from out of town are coming and spending money and creating jobs in there. And there is also a cost factor if you do live in these out surrounding towns, that you're coming here for your services, which is a major inconvenience.
Yeah.
So, definitely, I would agree with the two people on the left that we have to find some language in there. Ken?
I just don't understand why the language can't just be less concrete than that and just say, this is clearly an area where we need to do more research. I don't think the town plan needs to do the research or the planning department, but just identify it as a need and identify it as, I mean, all throughout the town plan, there are areas where we clearly, where you're very articulate in saying, we need to do more work on this. And so I don't know that it needs to be that specific. Just call it out as, this is an area that's clearly an issue for the town and one where more attention is needed.
Is the rest of the board happy with that as an approach?
I'm going to throw my weight toward what Ken just said. It's true. Not to say something like this is to really ignore a big elephant that's in the room here. I mean, we've been struggling with this in the budget. It's a major theme, and the town plan identifies the major themes. So therefore, it should be in there in some fashion. And I think that what Ken said is good, that we should identify the fact that we are concerned about the expenses that we bear as a regional hub.
And to determine some metrics by which we can actually address it.
Okay.
Yes.
Are other people fine with that?
That's fine.
That's, I'd like to see the language, but that is my goal.
Okay, great.
Maybe someone can explain to me this language on page 92 about the town's policy is to maintain a stormwater drainage system once it has been built to specifications. I was confused about that paragraph.
The way you said it, I am too.
Yeah.
What page was it?
Page 92,
Yep.
third paragraph from the bottom. The town's policy is to maintain a stormwater drainage system once it has been built to specifications. The whole paragraph, I didn't really particularly understand it. So maybe we could get that clarified.
Right, we were actually discussing this earlier this afternoon. So I think the first sentence is intended to read.
I don't need the clarification
Okay,
now.
we
We
just
just want it
just want
fixed
it
so that it
Okay.
tells me what's happening
Yep,
now
sure.
and where we're going.
Yep.
Other comments? This is the last chapter that we are going to do here this evening. And this is natural resources.
He's coming up and getting your water.
I know.
It's never happened before.
This table is not a regional hub.
He took my tissues.
It's okay. You actually pay taxes in Brattleboro, so.
Okay, chapter 11, natural resources, and again, this will be the last one. We were clear as to the next chapter. May be the most controversial, and that we wanted to have a separate meeting for the land use. So let's see if we can get through this. Natural resources, and you are up.
That would be.
That'll be you.
The natural resource chapter involves plans to protect and enhance environmental quality. And that includes effective stormwater management and management of streams, rivers, wetlands, setbacks, and buffers, restricting development in floodplains, also on steep slopes, in high elevation areas poorly suited for development, and by using conservation easements and development regulations to protect these significant resources. Any comments on the chapter?
Dora's been going first all night, so honestly.
Well, no one else has. So I actually would like to add something under 11.1, and that is document and map individual species, wildlife species, habitats, and corridors within Brattleboro borders.
I do believe that there's pretty clear protocols for doing that, and as the Fisheries and Wildlife Department produce GIS layers or maps containing that information, and that we depend on that to produce our own maps, and that's what is used in Act 250 reviews. So the point being here is that unless you do it at huge cost, using exactly the same protocols, or hiring somebody to do it, it's not an amateur thing.
Well, I'm not saying that it's an amateur thing, but you know, it is something that conservation commissions and other towns have done, and it is something that we can do, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a great expense. By seeing that, it's goal, and it's an action that we have a conservation commission that could oversee doing something like that, and you go out and you write grants, and I'm not saying that we should spend more money doing it. I'm not saying that. So, and we have a lot of goals and actions that might cost money that we have in here. So it's.
As an environmental professional who writes environmental impact statements, I would never use a locally designated list. I've always used the state list, just because that's the tool of art within the profession. And if the town were to do it, it would be really expensive, much too expensive for a regional hub.
Is it my understanding that what Dora's asked for is prepared, and it's prepared by the state?
Yes. Yes.
Right
So it
now,
exists.
right now, the data exists. Dora's right. There are other conservation commissions. Dummerston had a consultant, I think, through a place grant that no longer exists because our conservation commission did look to do that, where they were able to hire somebody and they were able to, do some on-site investigation.
But for what purpose? I guess I'm not understanding if it's
Just
done
to
at
have
the states.
better data, because the data that comes from the state, well, some of it can be old, like deer wintering yards, it's not necessarily verified frequently. And it's also taken at I think at a
A grosser scale.
Yeah, at a grosser scale. For example, wildlife corridors, if you look at the information they have on Brattleboro, it basically assumes that most of it is urban, and so they just stop. You know, so maybe far western points, you'll see some data that's saying, okay, this is a habitat area that connects up to Marlborough and Dummerston and whatnot, and then it just kind of falls away for the rest of the town, which doesn't mean we don't have, you know, the wildlife there.
Well, maybe if I change the language and say, look for ways to, as opposed to,
Can I ask a stupid question? What do you utilize that data when there are developments? Or when else would you utilize that data? I guess that's my question.
well, you would utilize it actually within a town if you're thinking about conservation land, and you're thinking about, like, you know, if say the state comes down and they want to put some money into, you would utilize that data to be able to figure that out. You also would utilize that data so that, say, you might not even have a zoning ordinance saying that somebody couldn't build in a place, but you could sit down with a property owner and you could say, look, this is what we know about the property that or what's nearby you, and actually work on doing development so that it has the least. I mean, we have that language in there so that it has minimal impact on. So, but if you don't have the data, and that all you're relying on is the state's data that has deer wintering yards and some wetlands, and they don't consider the lower class wetlands, they don't pay attention to those, and we don't know where our vernal pools are and all of those things, then you can't do that. So it's just a matter of getting the data, and I'm fine with, you know, if the language says, you know, look for ways to, you know, as opposed to just an absolute saying document that, but we don't have accurate data.
But Dora, how would you use that? For example, you know, there's nothing that compels a developer to assess the resources on his property. There's no municipal environmental review before he develops something, so even if the town were to have these maps, nobody would be compelled to use them.
Well, but we're not talking about compelling people, we're talking about ways in which we can enhance, you know, and help property owners that want the information to develop their land. We're not talking about compelling, we're not even talking about a zoning ordinance. It's just gathering information so that when something does come up, you actually have the information. Because if something comes up and you don't have the information, you can't do anything about it.
Yeah, but if the information is existing, and this is, from what I'm hearing, a huge expense for a general purpose, not that, and we wouldn't be implementing anything because of this, I'm not sure why we would go through this process.
Well, it is something that the Conservation Commission has expressed interest about, you know, but it would need grant funding. I mean, they're aware of that. You know, I think a combination of a consultant and volunteers, Conservation Commission and others, could do this type of inventory.
At the end of the day, for what purpose?
Well,
Would it prohibit a landowner from developing his property?
no.
It would help a landowner make maybe a better decision about where to develop on their
Right.
property, so that we protect the environment and what people have said is special about Brattleboro.
Wouldn't that come up in the Act 250 process?
No, not in such a direct way. I mean, the other possibility is that if something was discovered of significance, then that information could be transmitted back to the state. And then, you know, they have their own procedures for updating that information, and I think they acknowledge that, you know, they're behind it. I think it's important to recognize information gathered in this way wouldn't have clear regulatory effect, but it could be used, you know, in a beneficial way to inform property owners of, you know, natural aspects of the property that they have under consideration.
I'm also trying to support the Conservation Commission because I know that this is work that they want to do.
Well, there is a proxy to what you're asking for in terms of, you know, the steep slopes and the wetlands and the stream corridors. Those are mapped.
Right.
And one of the goals is to use those buffers for conservation subdivision, for example. And that would give greater flexibility in the developing and subdividing property that wouldn't have to be like a cookie cutter. It could follow the stream and leave an open corridor. So absent species, you still have the flexibility to use, recognize natural resources when you're subdividing property.
But if you don't have the information about what the species are and how they move, you can't protect a corridor that you don't know exists.
Well, it's still a natural corridor, and you can assume that it's a habitat.
So I'm looking for some consensus here on the board. We have one group saying, yeah, we're not crazy about this. And we have one board member who would like to say something, so before we go out and do something here, I guess I would be looking at.
I support that last piece of the call for more education, and so maybe that's the first step. That was my middle ground. I'm done now.
And Sue does recognize that the Planning Commission has expressed interest in doing this and recognizes, what did I say, Conservation Commission, I'm sorry, and that what they were lacking was the grant funding to achieve it.
Right.
So including it somewhere, whether it be in the policies and actions or somewhere else in the plan, is not a negative thing if it's a goal and not a requirement. If we can find money, then God bless.
So we have.
I'm willing to consider language.
Is it?
David's willing to consider language. Ken is willing to.
Is it? I mean, it would be the product. I guess Ken, without wanting to put words in your mouth, the product sounds like it would be educational. So, assuming
the place to start.
Right. So, assuming the grant was to take place, the product would be information that was educational in nature. So, does that? I mean, it's up to you guys, but that's what I hear.
I'm never going to argue against more education.
Let's go on, just one.
Okay.
So we in?
Okay.
For now, let's see what looks like.
Okay. Is that all right?
Okay. In actions 1, 1, 2, 3, and 4, once again, I'd like to see all those phrased as considerations rather than adopt, require, and develop. It's a consistent theme. I also have a question. On page 110, with respect to timber cutting,
Where's that?
sorry, page 110, fourth paragraph, extensive timber cutting can drastically alter. The last sentence says the land use chapter of this plan discusses how such practices can exacerbate erosion and recommends regulating tree clearing, something that's not currently done at the local level. I'm wondering about whether other municipalities restrict logging on properties in a manner that's being described here. It may be best to leave the discussion to the land use chapter, but I do recall being involved in some zoning litigation in neighboring towns when I was in private practice, and there not being restrictions on logging individual parcels at the local level. And I'm wondering whether there are state limits on our ability to limit logging, and whether that is something that we should be including here, and if so, what priorities should be set and what considerations should be looked at.
I would say quickly, from my work at the Regional Planning Commission, there may be one or two that are doing some regulating of tree clearing. I think a common way that it is done is requiring building envelopes and then restricting land clearing within there. So it's, you could take it down a tree here and there, but it's, at the state level, they don't require a permit to like 40 acres, I think. It's a heavy cut, and there's a lot that can go on that, falls under that, but is beyond just kind of the maintenance and taking down some trees. So, through the zoning, I'm not, as a use, maybe a couple throughout the state, but it's more typically done through a building envelope. So if you're having a subdivision, then you require the building envelope to be shown and restricted.
So I'm a little concerned about trying to adopt that sort of restriction here without thorough review and discussion, particularly given the importance of logging to the economy here.
Yeah, I think this is better, it could be better articulated, but this is better understood as to say,
You're talking about best practices.
not just best practices, but
It's going beyond that.
when land development is considered, we don't typically review the extent of clearing that a property owner is going to undertake to install a driveway and a septic system and whatever building they're proposing to build. And there are many different ways of approaching that aspect of a land development project, and for the most part, most people, particularly in rural residential and rural areas of Brattleboro, appreciate the value that stands of trees give them and give the property, and are eager to achieve a setting that's in the woods. But we don't regulate that, and many times when it comes to land development practices, the way in which the land is cleared for the driveway and for the area that's under construction and the surrounding yard can be fairly devastating to the physical environment. And so what we're trying to pull out here is the use of a tool such as building envelopes. It would clearly define the limits of land alteration, including the clearing of the trees. As a practice, it's more common in parts of New Hampshire and certainly Massachusetts than it is here. And part of it is that logging is recognized as an agricultural practice here, and it's protected, therefore, and it's pretty broadly defined. But we're not talking about imposing restrictions on commercial logging. What we're trying to do is focus attention on the unintended consequences of large-scale clearing for land development for residential or commercial purposes, not logging as an activity.
And this is really just a reference over to the land use section,
Yes.
where I'm sure that there's more
Yes.
discussion. I call it out here because I see the reference. We'll have to have more of a discussion of it later as well.
Definitely, just to plant another little seed. I mean, this kind of came up because when we were attempting to do fluvial erosion the first time, there was a lot of people who were concerned that we weren't doing something upstream, and the development upstream impacts the rivers.
Right.
So this is kind of like, well, we do need to consider other parts of the watershed.
And it also goes hand in hand with the consideration of increasing lot sizes in the outlying districts, and I think those things all need to be looked at together and considered thoroughly throughout the process of revising the zoning ordinance.
Yes. And again, it could be better articulated, but that's the intent.
Thank you.
I have a question about getting rid of some of the active verbs I see in 11.1.2, 1.3, and 1.4. Dave, can I just ask you to explain again your objection to words like adopt, require, and develop?
Yeah. As a general matter, my view is that while the town plan should be raising issues for consideration with respect to rewrites of the zoning ordinance and our land use policies, that I'm not prepared at this point without a full analysis and discussion of the impact of those rewrites. I'm not prepared to endorse specific changes to our land use regulations and our zoning ordinances. And so throughout our public hearings, I've said that as to specific suggestions for rewriting land use regulations and ordinances, we should be saying that they should be considered in the town plan rather than adopted. That continues here in, I don't have it open anymore, what's 11.1, 2, 3, and 4.
Well,
So I'm not in favor at this point of saying let's adopt anything specific as part of the rewrite of the zoning ordinances. What's more, a prior zoning board only 3 or 4 years ago rejected the fluvial erosion regulations that were proposed. At select board, the select board, and I'm very troubled with the notion that without a full, thorough discussion here of the content of those regulations, this board would just say, well, now we're going to adopt them. I think we should be considering this going forward. There's been a lot of examples over the course of the last year or two of the board deferring to previous boards' decisions, and to just say, no, we're going to do it different. Now, I'm not prepared to say that. I want to see the language, and I want to consider it thoroughly and fully.
so are you saying that you, and let's say 11.1.2 on adopting fluvial erosion hazard regs, that you're saying that we should not say in the plan, you're saying that we should not, in the plan, say we should adopt a fluvial erosion hazard regulation? Or that we should not require riparian buffer zones? And that we should not necessarily develop conservation zoning and subdivision tools?
I'm saying we should consider those things.
Consider those, not adopt it. We should consider
The
those.
Planning Commission, I mean, we've been talking about this over the course of all the prior public hearings, and each time that we've said it, the Planning Commission says if you adopt it in the town plan, it doesn't mean you're really adopting it, and then if it's not adopted as part of the zoning ordinance rewrite, you can change the town plan. I don't think that's the way the process is supposed to work. These are specific recommendations that are being made by the Planning Commission to rewrite the zoning ordinances, and I'm certainly willing to consider them. Some of them seem like way good ideas, but I'm not prepared to endorse them specifically yet.
Okay.
I want to study them.
Okay, so for 11.1.2, what if you were to say instead, research and consider, and then on 1.3, research and consider requiring riparian buffer zones. You see what I'm saying?
That's what I've been
So
saying.
that there's,
right along, yeah.
well, consider, I'm looking for some stronger language. Because I think, for example, the following Storm Irene, that for us to water down a consideration of the fluvial erosion hazard set of regs on that would be eye-opening, you know, considering all the damage that we've seen.
And I mean, that's the reason it's back. It's not, I was on the board, I wasn't the chair, but I was on the board that did the original fluvial erosion hazard zone. And this is not sour grapes. We want it again, so we're putting in the plan. This is, when we went out to the public, there was a lot of concern about flood issues for obvious reasons. And this is the zoning tool that we have at our disposal. So we thought, in light of the circumstances, it made sense to bring it back, and there seemed to be a lot of support for that.
Yeah.
Can I just-
No, sorry.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just want to speak to the specificity. There was a court case a couple of years ago, JAM LLC Golf, that spoke to, you know, amongst the issues, vagueness in a town plan. And if you're going to, you know, depend on a town plan, it needs to be very clear. We think using a term like regulate or develop or require is clear language. Consider or research and consider, I can't imagine the courts would view that as specific and would give it any weight, you know, if there was a matter before them. So, you know, even when we get to the land use, we tried to use strong, clear language. And I was a little confused, David, with what you said before, but, you know, the town plan is advisory. You know, if we then attempt to adopt a fluvial erosion hazards and it doesn't pass, did you say we go back and amend the town plan? I don't.
Mr. Valenti has come before us a number of times and said, adopt a strong language. It's not going to be an indication that you're really endorsing the concept. And then if the zoning ordinances don't ultimately adopt the language, then you can go back and amend the town plan to take that out. And I'm not in favor of proceeding that way.
Well,
You wouldn't need to amend it.
I want to be clear. If we are adopting specific zoning provisions as part of this town plan or endorsing specific zoning provisions, I'll probably vote against it. Because I think it needs to be for consideration going forward. I've said it a lot of times, and that's my position. I mean, the issue about what a court case would or would not, how would or would not rely on the town plan. I think we need to understand what you're talking about in terms of the court case and the purpose for which it's looking at the town plan. If we're talking about 1950s consistency with the town plan, I understand that issue.
I don't intend to say that if you do the prescriptive language that it's not an expression of endorsement by the select board. You're right about that. What I'm saying is that we developed these concepts the way we developed them, that we've repeated ad nauseum. And if the select board agrees with them that it makes sense to have the prescriptive language, which will cause our committee to try to write something that works, and if it works, you'll adopt it, and if it doesn't, don't. I know that the select board may defer to past select board rulings, but I can't ever remember the select board looking at a town plan and saying, well, the last town plan said we're going to do this, so I'm going to vote this way or that way. But there is wisdom in it being prescriptive, because if this is what we want, and someone is doing land use development that is completely contrary to that, it serves as something of a buffer for the town as a chance to consider the full ordinance in some venues, which are pretty limited.
Yes. Please state your name and the town that you're from.
Jim Rosino from Brattleboro. So as a member of the Planning Commission and of the community, I guess I've been to several meetings now to listen to the debate about the town plan, and I think we're on one of the last chapters now, right? Or not the last chapter. And each time it's come up, there's been a similar theme, and that is to take what was definitive language that came from hundreds of hours of meetings of commissions and boards that are basically advisors to the select board, and to water it down to something so that there's no commitment. And as a planning commission, as a community, if we're not going to make any commitments, and if we're not going to take the advice of our advisors, I wonder what's the point of all these people running all these meetings if everything gets watered down, or members of the select board that want to know specific details can come to those meetings so that those things can be determined ahead of time rather than just completely watering down the town plan. So, you know, if all these commissions came together to advise the planning commission and all that input was taken to water it all down, to me seems to be counterproductive.
Thank you. But I would tell you, under our purview, that is, we get to do that here.
Yes, you do.
And whether,
Yes, you do.
whether you like the fact that
Yeah, I know.
these board members, and maybe I think a few of them did attend a few of the hearings, but at the end of the day, this is the process we're going to follow. So you're entitled to your opinion whether you agree with it or not.
I feel, after hearing both sides of this, quite strongly, in fact, that the language that we've been presented with is important and should be adopted. I think that if on 11.1.2, where it says adopt fluvial erosion hazard, that it is clearly implicit there has to be consideration of, and if there's the adoption of something that's watered down, whether it's the adoption of something that's watered down, but the adoption of a fluvial erosion hazard regulation set, I think, is basically mandated by our own response to the last flooding. And I think that these active verbs serve an important purpose. Therefore, I think we should stick with that language to maintain, to adopt, to require, to develop, to support, to educate, to cooperate, to remove. That all makes sense, and on the face of it, and as well as within further parsing of the meanings here, I think the language is good. It's been considered, the language itself has been considered at length. And I think that we would be doing the right thing for the public good to keep this language. This is with respect to, and with respect meant to what David has said in his concerns. However, I think that the plan is something that needs to go forward and should have all the gravity that was meant behind that language, because we do need to have these deliberative meetings where all these subjects are carefully considered, and they are carefully considered. It's one of the things that impresses me greatly about this town, is that the committees, certainly the ones where I've attended, have been respectful of process and have been thorough and have done a great deal of consideration. It is, as I just said just a minute ago, it is deliberative and it is considered. All these things are considered. So I really would like very much to go home tonight knowing where we stand as a board on this kind of active verbiage.
I want to give you some bad news. You're not going to get that through this evening. Because we are going to, after we adjourn here, we will schedule the next meeting where there are a lot of interested parties for the land use. And as we articulated in the beginning of this meeting, all the changes, though that would be a substantive change, where David has been clear in his articulation of rather than adoption and consideration. Those will all have to be made as formal motions. And at that point, board members will either be in support of or not in support of. And so that's where your language issues will get shaped.
Then the motion would have to be to strike what's there.
Yes.
Would have to be, well, the motion would be to change the language, and then there would be obviously discussion, and if there was 3 votes to change the language, and if there wasn't 3 votes to change the language, then the language would remain intact. Yes.
Hi, I'm Steve Schreiner from Brattleboro, and I'm a member of the Conservation Commission. I just wanted to speak in support of Mr. Chapman's comments on the language here. Both as a member of the community and a member of the Conservation Commission, I spent a lot of time over the past year and a half surveying the damage that Hurricane Irene has wrought and looking at all these issues. And I think that if there's any issue in town, and I haven't been involved in all of the different components of this, we're going to focus on the resources side. But if there's any of these issues in town that we need to focus on, this is about maintaining sustainability in Brattleboro. Talk about the expenses in this. FEMA picked up a good chunk of it, and the efforts that the town put to clean up the results of Irene. These regulations can potentially protect the town and avoid these expenses and hopefully mitigate future issues with these large storms.
Thank you, Steve.
I served on the Development Review Board for 9 years, and I watched meeting to meeting, year after year, the balance between regulations that we have and individual landowners' desires to use their land. And I fully respect the process that we went through in developing this town plan. I think it's chock full of great ideas that are worthy of consideration. But there are some very significant changes in our land use regulations that are contemplated by this town plan. They include increasing the size of parcels in outlying districts, which I think would have significant impact on individuals' ability to own land and develop homes in the manner in which it's been done for decades. I think that the land use proposals include suggestions for new design regulations, which are different in kind and would impose significant additional burdens on properties in town. I think that all of the land use regulations present good ideas for consideration. It's been my view throughout this process that the time for us to make substantive decisions on changes to the land use regulations should be when they're being rewritten and when everybody in town knows that we're talking about rewriting the zoning ordinance. And I'm opposed to premature endorsement of individual concepts at this town plan stage. That's why I'm in favor of the language being a consideration rather than a mandate for adoption. They're great ideas. It's a ton of work that's gone into it. They're things that should be considered, but I'm not ready finally to adopt these policy decisions that would change the nature of land use in town significantly without more dialogue from everybody in town. And I've heard from many people that they don't feel there's enough notice to believe that for people to understand that the ordinances are going to be changed and we're going to be making those public policy decisions here. That's why I like the language better in terms of consideration rather than adoption.
Having said that, we are probably not going to get another meeting. We're not going to continue into the land use sector because we told people we would have that as an individual meeting. I am looking at January 3rd, which is a Thursday night. Now that's outside the 15-day window, if you count up the days from today to there. Now, we can continue this until next Tuesday, the 18th, and then continue it until January 3rd, where we would hold that meeting on the land use.
We could also close and then just renotice another public hearing.
Well, we can do that also.
Good.
Okay. What is your?
I think
it's cleaner if we close this meeting and
Yeah, I agree that that's.
And because we would definitely be saying in the notification that we would be doing the town plan because we want to make sure that people are.
And so the one concern I have is making sure we have enough time to get the warning in the newspaper, and it'd be 15 days from then.
Yeah, but we warned to.
Well,
Just not sure, it might require a newspaper warning.
Well, today's the 13th, tomorrow is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
15 from the 13th is the 28th.
So there's.
Yeah, so.
There's time to get it.
That's
If
right.
we have to.
28th. So you got 18 days.
Right. So we could get a notice in the paper.
You can get it in the paper for Saturday.
Yeah.
What's today, Thursday? It's 21 days from today.
Okay.
So, Dora?
Just to bring up one concern, and that is, just to make sure if we're putting a notice in the paper, to be aware of the fact that it's holiday time and people don't notice these things because they're busy doing holiday stuff, and that we need to put out the word other ways to make sure, so we don't have people complain that they didn't know, because there's a lot of people who've been waiting for this chapter.
The point you make is duly noted, and of course, I think the planning department and the planning commission is crucially interested in having public input and the public being aware of the meeting. I would point out administratively that the obligation is
on the select board, it's your hearing.
We'll make sure we announce it at Tuesday's meeting too. Okay, I will accept the motion to adjourn. Well, I would accept the motion to, before I accept that motion to adjourn, I would close the public hearing,
Oh, yeah.
Right.
and then I would accept the motion to adjourn.
What time on the 13th? Do you want to do 5:30?
On
Third,
third,
5:30.
Sorry, 3rd.
third would be 5:30.
Can just restate your motion.
Close the public hearing and move to adjourn, or do they have to be separate?
That's great.
Well,
Close.
he closes the public hearing.
I close the public hearing.
It just had to be done before.
Hey, I would also like to move to adjourn.
All those in favor? All those in favor? Signify by saying aye.
So it looks like 5:30 on the 3rd.
Yeah.
So that should be posted.
No, that's my fault.